Hello, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, everyone, depending on where you are. Glad to see some people back. Hello, Justin. Hello to Simone. Welcome to Giuseppe. And everyone else who will be joining us. If anybody will welcome them in as well. Now, yeah, here is somebody else. Hello. Hello to you as well. Diogo Gomez, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. This is, yes, for those of you who have never been to one of these mini masterclass live appointments that I keep every week, more or less, is going to be a little more open than the others, in the sense that usually I reserve questions for the end of the session. But if you have any doubts on terminology on what I'm saying, or you are not following, really following the whole thread of thoughts, then please just say something in the chat, or speak up in your mic. And I'll be very happy to turn this into a conversation, or instead of just a lecture, which I'm not particularly fond of in general. The main reason why I wanted to do this is because in the conducting challenge that we did, as you know, a while ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, in the group, from a lot of the videos, and then we sort of brush on it during the live session with whoever took part in it. But from a lot of videos, what I've noticed mainly is that pretty much nobody had a sense or an idea of what a pulse is. You guys may have had some sort of instinct from time to time, but so it wasn't really controlled, or it wasn't really voluntary as well, which led to quite a few things, which then leads to quite a few things, including making big gestures, or making up for certain movements with other unwanted movements of the body. So let's start from the beginning. I actually want to ask you guys something. Now, let's do, a pencil. Let's pretend this is a baton. If you look at this, what do you see? Can you tell me what you see, what you saw?
That's the scheme of the 4, but
yeah, it's a 4/4 pattern.
Information about, yes, but it was missing the information about the points. So where is the room for the rhythmical subdivisions?
Yeah, pretty much that's what it boils down to, in the sense that what I was doing was a 4-beat pattern. Yes, Diego says the point of the beat. Yes, now was doing a 4-beat pattern without any other information, right? So you know where the beats are in terms of, well, wait, let's just let somebody else in. Yeah. Hello, Gabriel. Welcome to this session. So you know where the beats are, because you know a 4/4 pattern. If you're on the other side of the podium, so if you're sitting in the orchestra, you know where the beats are, but you get absolutely no information, and you sort of get an idea of the tempo by the speed at which the beat points are sort of swinging from one part to another of the pattern. But you have no certainty about the tempo, the dynamic, the articulation of whatever the music is that you're about to play. You have no indication whatsoever or anything. This is what came out and what comes out 90% of the time when you just do these sort of movements. And if you look at the videos in the group, there's many of that. This is, mind you, this is not a way, something. I don't want to bash down on people or beat people down, because that's not the point of this. The point is to try to make you understand what the trigger is, because this is a common problem in many conductors. And one of the things that it leads to is, for instance, either the orchestra to slow down, or to start at a much slower tempo than the conductor has in mind, because the pulse is not clear. And that is one of the things that is what Giuseppe was pointing out earlier. What we're missing here in this type of movement is the pulse, which means the information that is fundamental for the player to understand at which, for instance, at which speed to go. What's the speed of the piece? Because of course, if we do the same piece, I do it at one speed, Giuseppe does it at a different speed, Simone does it at a different one. Justin, Diogo, and Gabriel Tevan have other 3 different tempos. So how do people in front of us can switch from my conducting to your conducting, which happens often if you're guest conducting, for instance, or if you're called in at the last minute because the conductor, broke a leg, not figuratively speaking, but actually going down the stairs when he was going down in the pit. And then you're called in to replace the conductor. And then how do you make everything happen in a heartbeat? That's the point of the pulse. The pulse is one of the smallest movements that you can do as a conductor, and that is the only thing that any orchestra in the world really needs to speed up, to slow down, to understand the speed of the tempo, of the initial tempo, to get an entrance, a cue. The pulse gets everything in it, including the articulation and the dynamic. And when you learn how to control that, then you're pretty much on board with a lot of things that you need to drive the orchestra. Now the question is, how do you make a pulse? Because, and this is another thing that, actually, please do me a favor. Once we finish this, and you have some time for yourself, go on YouTube. Bring up a video of any conductor good conductor, of course. Pick Paavo Järvi, for instance. Take Kleiber, Karajan, anybody. And look for a pulse. And you will see, and you will start notice that at some point, when they need to catch the attention of the orchestra, there is something that, like a rallentando and accelerando, something where they need to be in charge and control the orchestra. You will see that there is a movement somewhere, somehow, that does that. Now, this movement is, when you learn to do it consciously, because the thing is also that a lot of conductors do it unconsciously after a lifetime of conducting. But if you can learn that ahead of time, then it's so much better for you, right? The point, this movement, which corresponds with the pulse, usually stays in the wrist. That's where it originates from. And even when you see conductors going down like this, let's see if I can get not off camera completely, going down like this, and then at some point you see this type of movement, that what makes up, in a sense, for this type of movement. Sometimes it goes in the head, when you see this thing. and people try to drive the orchestra with the head or with the knees when conductors are bouncing into knees. All of these movements make up for the absence of the pulse in the wrist and consequently in your baton. Now, the easiest and clearest way to make a pulse for anybody is to actually pick up the baton. Since I have one here, pick up the baton. Of course, that's why you have your hand flat this way and not this way, or not this way or not this way, because if the movement is in the wrist, then if you hold the baton this way, you have no way of controlling the movement of the wrist. If you hold it this way, you have no way to controlling it. This way, your wrist is completely free and unlocked and free to move up and down. If you want a very easy way to practice pulsing, or to think about practicing this type of movement, you can think about knocking on a door. When you knock on a door, you do this type of movement, right? Actually, from the side would be like this. You do this type of movement. Now, take your door and put it from vertically, put it horizontally, and then you do the same type of movement. You just reverse it. This transfers to the tip of the baton, and when this transfers to the tip of the baton, then you have absolute control of what's going on in the orchestra, and you can control everything. And this, mind you, this is the way that you can break patterns without confusing anybody in the orchestra. Now, do you remember, if you were there actually last week, I had last week I had a live session with Wayne Toes on cytotechnique, and this whole session came up because we had a sort of a friendly discussion in another group about the cytotechnique itself. It was a very short one, and then we agreed on making the thing public. And there are quite a few things in what he says that have the same aim at the same result. And last week I brought up an example, which was the beginning of the second movement of Beethoven First. Which is an example that I always bring up because it's, in a way, it's easier to understand than others. But you know that how that goes, normally speaking. Tarim pim pirim pim pirim pim parim parim pam tarirari tirari. Now, you can do this in this way. You can do this in a variety of ways. And you can add whatever you want in it. However, you're still conducting in 3. When you gain control of a pulse, then that phrase can turn into something like, oh, parim pam parim pim pirim pim papim papim. And then you can switch hand and switch section and catch the other section if you want. The point is that as long as you put this movement inside your phrase, then you are then you're off for doing pretty much whatever you want to with the orchestra. Now, the other point is that not every pulse needs to be put on every beat. Yes, the pulse generally corresponds with the beat, if you wish, within the time frame and the pace of your music. Okay, perfect. However, in a phrase like this one, if you pulse in the same way for every single beat, which is what you normally do in a 3/4 in a pattern, normal pattern, then you're gonna end up chopping the line, because everything that we do, if the orchestra watches closely at what we do, everything that we do has an impact on the sound of the orchestra, on the response of the orchestra. So if the orchestra sees something that is distracting or disturbing for the line or for their playing or whatever, then they do one very simple thing. They start ignoring the conductor. They follow the concertmeister or the section leader, and that's it, and you're toast. So if you do this type of things constantly, for instance, in a line like that, that would negatively impact the sound. That's why not all pulses were created equally. Music is not exactly a democracy. But if we keep on the example of that second movement of Beethoven first, then you would have a slightly stronger pulse at the very beginning to get the orchestra, the second violins to begin, and then you come back. Ooh, parim pam parim pam. For instance, the orchestra doesn't need the second violins in this case. They don't need the second pulse or even the first actually of the bar. They don't. What they need is, and then they start. You can and if you don't trust me, you can do an experiment next time in front of the orchestra. Start them, and then with an excuse go. Let them play and go in the hall with the excuse of listening to the acoustic, and you'll see how long and how far they get to without you. And then you realize that you're not needed for 1 2 3 1 2 3. They don't need that. So if you're not needed for that, then how do you justify your presence on the podium if you just keep doing this? You have to justify your presence in some ways. Otherwise, what's the point of being there? There is no point, right? So, and there's another fact. Oh, thank you. I got a thumbs up from Giuseppe. I think 2 thumbs up in the video from Giuseppe. And there is another point. There is another bonus to this thing. The fact is that when you show that you are in control and can make people in front of you, players, respond and react to what it is that you do, then this becomes a two-way street. So you do something and they give you something in return, because basically, well, to be perfectly frank, they realize that you're not a moron and that you're not a fake, and that you're actually doing something over there that they can get some benefits from. And then they start looking at you more, and then they start giving back more to you, and then you give something back to them, and it keeps going and going and going till the end of the concert. This is how you make an actual performance and not just an execution of the piece from top to bottom. This is how you create something, because you connect with the people that you have in front of you. And most of the times nowadays you don't have time to connect with words. You can't go in a rehearsal, give them a half-hour lecture, or invite them all for dinner and get them to know you and get to know each other, and that doesn't go. You have to get on the podium and get to work. And most of the time you have no time to work. You have, or at least you have not enough time, and certainly not as much as you would like to have, because we always would like to have more time to do something extra. But this is the nature of the business nowadays. So we can dream about a lot of things, but let's not beat around the bushes. You have a job to do. You have to know how to do it, and the better you know how to convey your musical information through your gestures and not through your words, the quicker you get the result, and the quicker you get also the respect of who's in front of you, because they don't have to struggle and to try to guess what it is that you want. And that's why, for instance, when you have a pulse, and I was mentioning from the wrist, this is something that another thing that I often point out. You have three components of the conducting arm. One is the wrist, one is the forearm, and the other one is the entire arm, right? Now, let's start from the fact that normally speaking, you shouldn't be moving around and dancing on the podium or walking around or doing these type of bouncy movements, which are distracting for different reasons. But even when you're standing up straight and you have this kind of posture that sort of says, okay, I'm here and everything is going to be in here. If you break your wrist, then you get yourself in trouble again, because try to pretend you are again a player in the orchestra and try to follow this. Try to guess where the pulse is in here. You can't, because there is one here, another one here. So this type of movement, which is often seen a lot, is very confusing for who's in front of you. And then what's the reaction of the orchestra? They slow down, because they all need to wait to hear each other, to see where the common ground is, because there is no one point of reference. There is 1, 2, 3 point of reference. So he is looking at this, she is looking at this, and half of the cellists are looking at this one. and then we're not together, or they listen and they're not with you, and they 2 seconds after come in 2 seconds after your gesture. These are all things that you need to be aware. If you're moving this, then do not move your forearm. If you're moving your forearm, then the motion is in the forearm and it's not in the wrist. Otherwise, you get this. And same with the shoulder. Now, on the other hand, there is one thing that you need even when you move your forearm or your forearm or your entire arm, and that is the pulse at the end of the movement. And for this, let's take hold on a second. Let's take one example that I'm sure you're quite familiar with, because this is deemed one of the most difficult attacca for in the entire repertoire, right? Beginning of a Beethoven 5, infamous beginning of Beethoven 5. What is the most common mistake in this one? The most common mistake in this one is a pulse within the preparatory beat, before the first bar. So you see, let me do this. Am I in camera? Yes. So you see something like, and of course, half of the orchestra is going to start on this, pa 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 pa, and the other half is going to start on the other one. That's why it's important to understand and to have control over awareness of your body, awareness of your movement, and control over your pulsing mechanism. That's why you need to know it and need to understand it, because once you understand it, then you can control it. And once you can control it, you can do whatever you want with it. So what you want in this case is a pulseless preparation and then a pulse on the downbeat, so that you can when you go up, you go up without pulsing, but then the pulse is on the pa 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 pa. And I don't think I'm in camera, because pa 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 pa. If you look at the first movement, when I'm going up with the arms, there is no pulse in here. I'm just going up from a sort of a zero neutral position. There is no pulse, and then the pulse is at the arrival at the bottom. Pa, 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 pa. That's where the attacca is that's all there is to this beginning. Nothing else. Once you learn the mechanism, then the it's like the magician, you know. Once you know the trick of the magician, then there is no trick. It's a very simple explanation, and you learn how to do it. The same thing is when after you look. I want to show actually. I want to show you another thing because this type of movement. This is the most common way, right? Up, down to do this. However, I'm sure you guys are familiar with payments conductor Marian Alsop, and Marian Alsop has been also for a period of time a student of Harold Faberman, with whom I studied myself. And Harold loved to tell this story on the fact that Marian Alsop, at one point, they were doing this piece, and at one point she had some trouble in starting this piece because of her physicality or whatever. So he came around with a different type of gesture that would adapt better to her physicality, which is another thing that you need to take into consideration. And I'll get back to this in a moment, but this gesture was, instead of being up down, was actually sideways. Pa 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 pa, pa 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 pa. The mechanism is the same. It's a snap in the wrist, a pulseless preparation, a snap in the wrist, and that's the attacca for pa 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 for the orchestra, the strings and the clarinets. Now I wouldn't do it myself in that way because I don't feel it that way. But that's a different issue. See, I have a certain type of body, which is actually getting fatter with age, but that's a different thing. 20 years ago, I was much slimmer than this. Nevertheless, so body changes throughout the years, but I have a certain type of physicality. You all have different type of body, of physicality. When you incorporate these movements, you don't copy paste just one thing. You incorporate a mechanism, and then you adapt it to your own physicality. You make it your own, so that it feels natural within your own body, within the compounds and the confines of your own physicality. That's how you make things look natural and not how to say it, and not like when you copy somebody in a pedestrian way. So to conclude this thing, if you go on in this first movement of Beethoven, after the attack, the second attack is exactly the same. Pa 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 pi, up and without pulse, and then down pulse. Pa 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 pi, mark the corona bar, and then you have again the same movement. Pa 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 pi, pa 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 pi. And now, what can you do in this situation? Group bars into phrases. You're in one, right? The phrase is clearly a 4-bar phrase, at least for this beginning, with the pickup on the second violins in bar 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, 6, yes. That's the pickup. That would be, if you translate the phrase into a 4-4 pattern, then the second violins in bar 6 would have the pickup, so the 4, and then you can group into a 4-bar phrase, and then into a 4-bar phrase, and then into another 4-bar phrase. And the fact of the matter is that when you do this, you're showing the phrasing of the bar, and you can switch hands depending on the section that you need to cue. And in all of these situations, you have small pulses so that they can come in precisely when they need to. Now, I would let you ask all the questions that you want to right now. I just want to tell you one thing, that if by any chance we get cut off, the Zoom meeting is about to finish. It's exhaust is 40 minutes thing. So if we get cut off, you all have a different link to go, and I'll start the other meeting right away, and we'll rejoin into the other meeting. So now, I hope this was clear enough for everybody, at least to get a grasp on what the difference between the beat and the pulse is, and how fundamental the pulse is in driving an orchestra. But please, if you have any question, just fire away. I'm all ears. Or comments, for that matter. Yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you for this explanation. It was very clear, and I see the same point. So I totally agree.
Thank you.
I mean, I do the same and I teach the same. So I absolutely agree. What I normally also say, I don't know if you agree, is that it's really important to divide between active and passive conducting in giving the.
Yeah. That's actually what I meant when I said that not all pulses are created equally, meaning that some pulses you need, those are the active ones, yes, and some pulses you sort of don't need, and actually you run into the peril of getting in the way of the orchestra. If I assume that's what you mean, right, with the active and passive conducting.
Yeah.
It's a matter of learning. That's also part of the partially experience and partially confidence in learning when it is that you need to lead, and when it is that you need to let go and just let the orchestra play. Otherwise, you actually get in their way, and the last thing that you want to is get in the way of the orchestra. And if you're, as Giuseppe points out, if you're constantly active in, then it's like you're in somebody's face all the time, and you cannot have a conversation. Look, when you're conducting, when you're making music, you're having a conversation with somebody else. That's you're having a conversation with the orchestra as well. Sometimes you talk, sometimes they talk. Sometimes you ask the question and you sort of incite them in with your movements, but then you also have to be able to hold back and wait for the answer. Otherwise, you're just doing all the talking. Then what's the point? It's not a conversation anymore. It's a monologue. I'm sorry, I didn't actually mean to do exactly that, which was interrupting you and just keep going with my own monologue. So please, Giuseppe, sorry, go ahead.
No, but that's true. I mean, that's exactly the point. If you want to give an active information which arrives before that information, you need to give a little bit of silence in your gesture, so that they just can realize that, okay, now we get the real information. Now we can give our answer to this information that we get, and then you get another information, but from the passivity. And I just wanted to say one more thing. Don't you think that it's important in this beginning of Beethoven? Don't you think that it's important to show where's the end of this pickup?
Well, yeah, it probably got out of this because I wasn't completely in the camera, I suppose. Because normally, of course, there you go. I'm out of the camera. I'm not tall enough for this. Wait a second. Let me see if I can put this down a bit. If I can move the camera down a bit. Yeah. Because when for me, this beginning is all the way down here, right? That's where the core of the sound is in this case. So when I have a pickup and then go down, then of course I also have the second bar. Pa-pa-pa-pee, pa-pa-pa-pee, and then move on. That's is that what you meant?
Yeah, because I'm a little bit. I mean, when I conduct, I always try to keep in control in a good way of the real rhythm, so of the real space that the musician needs to play the notes, so that all notes are clear. Okay,
Yeah.
we have so much space, it means so much time to play all our notes, so that they can just realize which is the tempo. Because I mean, with it's a kind of physicality, of course. So to like, I also say to some people, okay, just think about this: a big hammer here, go up passive, and then go down,
Yeah.
and then you give a big one, and then the orchestra starts, because it's very clear where is this information. But then to the ones who has a clearer physicality, or they're a little bit farther, or they have more control of their body, I always tell them, okay, try now to show them where it arrives, where is the E flat, and not just where is the pickup. So
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. Ah, okay. Sorry. Yeah, now I understand what you meant. Yes. No. Well, of course. No. You're absolutely right. Yes, but I was actually focusing in this case on the pickup, because that's where your pulsing needs to be in order for the orchestra to start together. In this case, if you only give a beat, then the orchestra is not going to be together. That's the point. This is how this all came into this this conversation. But then there is another thing. You also, of course, have to give it a direction. Otherwise, as you rightfully are pointing out, then it would just be ta 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 ti. It's all the same. So you're not going anywhere with the music. You stand on the ta ta ta, and then what's coming after that. But that, I think it's it falls into the musical phrase and leading of the phrase and intention, of course. As it goes for the phrase after that. I mean, for the pickup after that, and then for the phrase when it begins, then you have to get there, and you have to, you sing the phrase, you give it a direction, and then you get to a certain point. Otherwise, it's just a series. Otherwise, from a series of beats, it becomes a series of pulses, which are completely useless to the music in itself. I mean, we're still making music now. My point in this case was to break down a particular, a specific technical element and technical aspect of this, especially for what we started talking about. I think this session is about to end, so we're actually going to get cut off. People are slowly but surely reconnecting. Is it clear what we were saying just a minute ago? The point was clear, right? You of course you have to have a direction, and need to know where it is that you're going. Otherwise we're not making music. Otherwise we're just beating time or pulsing time, and then at that point that is completely meaningless and useless. We're not time beaters. We're not metronomes. We're musicians. So we should make music. Okay, so I think that's pretty clear for everybody. Do you guys have any? Wait, somebody else is coming in. Do you guys have any other questions that? I mean, I saw some latecomers as well who might have missed part of it at least. But if you guys have some questions, please, by all means, fire away. Yes, please.
Sure.
Hello.
So, how do you think about these six bars introduction about the structure?
Of the first 6 bars.
Yeah. If you think 1 4 1, if you think 2 3 1, what do you think is 6 bars?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, starting from bar 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, starting from bar 6, I actually start grouping bars, and that would be the 4. Bar 6 is a 4, and then you go down in 1, 2, 3, 4, in grouping bars into 4-bar phrase, right? Now, if you follow the same procedure at the beginning, I would actually do pa 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 pim 2 1. If I had to put it into yeah, into a phrasing that is like 2 or 3 or 4, as you mentioned, then the first 2 bars for me would be 2 1. Boom. That's still the pickup. Ta 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 tam. That would still be an upbeat, and same would be for bar 3. Bar 3 still would be an upbeat. Everywhere throughout this movement, the pa 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 pi pa 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 pi pa 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 pim, whenever it starts a phrase, in the same in the third movement of the symphony, pa 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 pim pa 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 pim pa 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 pim tira tita. It's not pa 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 pim pa 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 pim. It's not one. That's not the one of the phrase. That's the pickup. The 4 or 2, depending on how you conceive it and you see the phrase. In this particular movement, as you may see, sometimes the phrase is in 4, sometimes it's in 2. At one point, it actually goes into 3 as well, because Beethoven likes to trick people and play with structure and everything else. So, usually at the end of the game that he plays within the phrase structure, then when it comes back to the pickup, it's again this. This is a pickup bar, right? It's not ta 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 ta, 1 2 1 ta 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 team. And you can actually see in this case, you can actually see it from. In this case, it's actually quite evident, because if you look at the cello part and the harmony that it creates, you have 4 plus 4 phrases, bar phrases. Yes. Now, if you go at the beginning, ideally you can group it however you want to. However, you also have to consider the character of the piece, because I mean, tendentially, if you wanted to, you could even do on bar 3, you could do ta 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 ti ta 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 ti ta ti ta ti ta ti ta ti. So have a 3-bar phrase on bar 3 4 5, and sorry, a 4-bar phrase on bar 3 4 5, and then have the pickup on bar 6. However, the point. The thing that you need to consider is that when you think this way, then automatically you're weakening the 3rd bar of that specific phrase, because then, or you're putting an accent on it or something, because if this is your pickup and this is your 1 and this is your 2 and this is your 3, then this would be weaker than this. Which in this case it is not, because the music doesn't call for it. It's actually an extension of it. So making a 3-bar out of that, a 3-bar phrase out of that snippet, doesn't really make much sense to me musically. It can work on paper if you wish, if you wanted to make it to work on paper, but musically speaking, then you get entailed into a whole different other type of problem. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Any other question from anybody? Or consideration, comments, requests? Actually, request, and as far as requests goes, I actually mean it, as you know, because in the group I always put periodically polls for to know what is that you want to focus on, what you want to know, and this beat and pulse was at the top of the list. And by the way, you can keep this in mind for the next. I don't know if it's the next one or the one after that, when we'll talk about the excerpts of Appalachian Springs, because that's a really good example of when and we'll take a couple of them, the most difficult ones, the ones that are always asked in auditions and competitions and all sort of stuff, right? Because the rest is pretty easy, but there's two excerpts in particular that are really challenging, let's put it this way. And that is an excellent example. That's why I actually put it in the poll. It's an excellent example of pulsing and when to pulse and when not to, which goes back to what Giuseppe was mentioning earlier, active and passive. Because there are some things, if you're always active in those passages, then that's a guarantee for the orchestra not to go together. Then you really need to know when you need to pulse actively and when you just need to step back or show. This is another example of inactive pulse. Is if we stay for a second on Beethoven 5, is on the fifth bar, because on the fifth bar, the Corona bar, you're not going down to do this un ta 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 tim pam and then a big freaking sign for the Corona bar, right? You just mark it. It's a bar, it's there, you mark it, but you're not pounding over it. Where you're active on the upbeat, and then you give it a direction, but then you mark the bar of the Corona. You're not active on the bar of the Corona. You need action again on the following bar, on the pickup of bar number 6, because then you have the second violins that need this in order to start and go together. So, do you guys have any other question or suggestion? If you have a suggestion, actually, you can also put them in the group, and I'll gladly pick them up in the future live sessions. And if you have suggestions or anything else, please just do let me know. If you have questions now or later, if something comes up later after you've slept on all of these things and you've re-elaborated part of these concepts, and then you say, oh well, I didn't understand shit about what he said in that passage, so I'm gonna need some more clarification. By all means, yes, please.
About the position of the instruments, the string instruments.
The seating.
How do you think first? The seating. Yeah.
I usually have up until, I mean, it's not a rule, but of course, what I personally prefer having is first violins on the left, of course. Then I have the cellos and basses behind the cellos. Then I have the violas, and then I have the second violins. You can also do it in the so-called quartet or regular seating with first, second violas, cello, and basses. But personally, I actually prefer to have first and second violins on the opposite side and the motor inside, because usually in Beethoven it's a little different, and especially in this symphony, because the motor continuously goes from one in the first movement, at least, from one section to the other. The motor is and it jumps continuously, right, from the second to the violas to the first to the but generally speaking, if you look at the classical repertoire, then the engine, what moves the rhythmical parts are always underneath, right? You have them in the violas and you have them in the cellos, and for me, it makes sense to have this stereophonic the stereophonic effect of the first and the second violins, and have the um, rhythmical part internally, so the first violins can listen directly to the cellos right here, and the second violins listen to the violas right there. So there's one ear that is for per section that is attached to the engine. As I said, it's not really a rule of any kind. Nobody's gonna shoot you or me if you use a different seating, and everybody's being experimenting with different seatings all the way. If you look at Lucerne, they often have the violas on the outside instead of the first violins, right? So, as I said, it's not a rule and it's not an obligation. Find what works better for you, for your musical idea as well. And also, you do need to take into consideration another factor, the acoustic of the hall, because that always plays naturally in combination with the size of the orchestra, and that always plays a part in the outcome and in the end result. Especially now, where acoustics are changing because of social distancing, and that is something else that people, we used to have two people in the string section. We used to have two players per stand. Now there is one player per stand, so they have to stay separate. I'm actually talking about Italy in the last concert that I did, which was 6 months ago almost. And after that, we went into lockdown. So I don't know. The next should be in April, maybe, and I'll tell you what's changed if anything has changed. But so far, we still have to do one person per stand, which of course spreads out the orchestra much more than it usually is. And now, if you're in a very generous hall, which could be a church, for instance, that is sometimes even extra generous, but if you're in a very generous hall acoustic-wise, then you can play around with different seatings and with different situations. But if you're in a particularly dry space, then you really need to be careful, because you already have distancing, and then you really need to try it out in the hall to see what works better and what works, for the best result in the end. Because it's not a call that you can make unless you've been in the hall already and you know how it works. It's not a call that you can make, at a table and decide, okay, this is how it's going to go because it's going to work. If you've never been in a certain hall, or if you've never been in a certain hall with the social distancing between the orchestra members, then you can have an idea, but then you need to try it out and see if it works. And if it doesn't, change it. Very simple. Yeah? Okay. Anything else from anybody? Nope. Okay. Well, yes, it was a pleasure actually to spend this Saturday afternoon for me, parts of this Saturday afternoon for me with you. And I don't know where you're coming from, but I know that some of you are not coming from the Amsterdam time, and some of you are in the morning, and some of you are actually in the evening, and some of you, I don't know, who was it that was from Australia, which was a really bad time because it's like in the middle of the night or somewhere really there. So thank you for being here and getting up early or going to sleep very late, whatever that is. Again, if you have any question, drop a post or a question in the group. and or write me a message, and I will see you next Saturday. For now, have a really good weekend, and we'll see each other soon. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.